We live immersed in a silent belief that there is always something wrong with us. From an early age, we are told that we need to be smarter, more beautiful, more successful. This constant pressure creates the feeling that we are never enough. But does life really demand so much from us? Or is the real problem in the way we were taught to look at ourselves? Social media is the modern mirror of this anguish. Every photo, every achievement displayed reinforces the poison of comparison. Suddenly, we no longer live to experience, but to prove something to someone. And in this game, the soul gets lost between filters and expectations. I ask, who are we without this stage? What remains when the applause stops? Socrates, with his timeless voice, would remind us that wisdom begins in the recognition of one's own ignorance. What does this mean here? It means that maybe the mistake is not in us, but in the way we believe we need to fix ourselves. This relentless pursuit of the ideal self may be the greatest of illusions, and recognizing it is the first step toward freedom. Philosophy, when practiced as living reflection, invites us to a simple return to self-knowledge. Not that superficial knowledge of labels or titles, but the deep dive into our inner truth. It is there that we discover that life is not a ladder to be climbed, but an open field to be lived. And here lies the crucial point. What if you were already enough, exactly as you are now? What if this whole race to correct yourself were nothing but dust over the brilliance of your soul? What you may discover can change not only the way you see yourself, but also the way you live from now on. Imagine yourself standing before an old mirror, its glass stained and warped. You look at yourself, but the reflected image is not faithful. It sometimes appears larger, sometimes smaller, sometimes unrecognizable. This mirror is like modern society. It returns to us versions of ourselves laden with filters, unattainable standards, and endless comparisons. And so arise the doubts. Am I enough? Do I need to be better? Am I falling behind? In everyday life, this reveals itself in digital anxiety. We scroll through endless feeds and see perfect lives, sculpted bodies, professional achievements displayed like trophies. The result? We feel we are always falling short, trapped in a game of self-sabotage. Psychologists call this upward social comparison, and studies show that it increases symptoms of depression and low self-esteem. Socrates would say, with irony, that we are too concerned with knowing others and forgetting the most important thing, self-knowledge. After all, how can we understand the soul if we are too busy trying to imitate distorted reflections? Wisdom begins in the admission of one's own ignorance, he reminded us. And here arises the triad. Ignorance is believing in the deformed mirror. The consequence is living imprisoned by false standards. The solution is to return to Socratic maiutics, the exercise of questioning, truly asking yourself, who am I, beyond what others project onto me? This first step opens the space for philosophical reflection. The mirror does not need to be broken, it needs to be understood. And when we understand it, we realize that the image it shows is not the truth, but only a game of illusions. And you? Have you noticed how social media works like that distorted mirror? Share your thoughts in the comments. Think of a great theater. On stage, each person wears a mask. The successful professional, the good mother, the strong man, the perfect woman. We perform skillfully, but often forget that we are more than roles. This metaphor is not merely literary, it is a description of everyday life. At work, on social media, even among friends, we present an adjusted version, a socially acceptable character. But the actor behind the costume, that one remains hidden. The problem is that, by confusing the mask with identity, we end up believing we are only what others expect. That is why so many feel an existential weariness, an emptiness that neither vacations, shopping, nor distractions can fill. Psychology calls this self-alienation, the disconnection between who we are and what we show. Plato, Socrates' disciple, described this with his famous allegory of the cave. There, prisoners mistake shadows for reality. Today, it is not fire-lit shadows on the wall, but the digital shadows of edited photos and rehearsed speeches. And the inevitable question is, how long will we go on believing that the mask is the truth? Here, the triad is revealed. Ignorance is believing that the role is the self. The consequence is living as a puppet of external expectations. The philosophical solution is the Socratic courage to remove the mask, face the discomfort of emptiness, and rediscover the naked soul without adornments. The curious thing is that when we stop performing, we discover that authenticity is not something to be achieved, but something to be remembered. As Epictetus would say, do not seek for things to happen as you wish them to happen as they do, and you will live serenely. And you, have you ever felt imprisoned by a role that did not correspond to your true self? Share your thoughts in the comments. Imagine a river in constant motion. Its waters flow without pause, never the same, never repeating. Heraclitus said, "No one steps into the same river twice." This metaphor reminds us that we too are always changing, thoughts, emotions, desires. Yet we insist on treating ourselves as something fixed, as if we were a stone statue that must be sculpted until it reaches perfection. In practical life, this translates into an obsession with control. We organize schedules, set goals, chase standards. When something goes off track, we feel frustration, as if we had failed. It is the reflection of modern perfectionism, which, according to psychological research, is directly linked to higher rates of anxiety and burnout. We live trying to hold water in our hands, and the inevitable happens. It slips away. Socrates would lead us to the question, why do we demand from life a stability that even the river does not have? Wisdom is not in resisting the flow, but in recognizing it. We are, like the river, movement, impermanence, a constant dance between arising and disappearing. Here appears the triad. Ignorance is believing we must be static, perfect, unchanging. The consequence is the anxiety of never being ready. The solution is philosophical. To embrace impermanence, to practice self-knowledge, and to recognize that virtue lies not in arriving, but in walking the path. Aristotle reminded us that virtue is a habit. In other words, it is not about reaching an endpoint, but about cultivating day by day a more conscious and balanced way of living. Like the river, we do not need to freeze the flow. We need to learn to swim in it. And you, have you tried to hold on to the waters of life? Or have you already learned to flow with them? Share your thoughts in the comments. Picture a prison without bars, where the walls are not made of stone, but of beliefs. This prison is built from phrases we have heard since childhood. You must become someone in life. Don't fail. Be strong. Seemingly harmless words that turn into invisible chains. Thus, we grow up believing our worth is always elsewhere, in school grades, in a job promotion, in the validation of strangers. In practice, this reveals itself in rampant consumerism. We buy clothes to be accepted, gadgets to be admired, even courses to feel better, but the feeling never lasts. As studies on dopamine show, the pleasure of material achievement is fleeting, followed by an even greater emptiness. We are always running, but the finish line keeps moving farther away. Socrates, with his sharp irony, would say that we live believing we possess freedom, when in fact we are slaves to expectations we have never questioned. What good is life if it is not examined? He would ask. This is the essence of reflection, to look inward and realize that the prison is not in the external world, but in the limits of our own mind. Here once again is the triad. Ignorance is failing to see the invisible chains. The consequence is living exhausted, trying to meet unattainable standards. The philosophical solution is the Socratic exercise of freeing oneself through questioning. What if I am already enough? What if my truth does not need the approval of others? The most curious thing is that when we dare to break one chain, we realize that many others were illusory. Freedom, after all, begins as an inner act of self-knowledge, not as external permission. And you, have you identified the invisible chains that imprison you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And what if everything you believe about yourself is just an illusion? What if the life you defend so strongly is nothing more than a poorly rehearsed play? And what if you have never truly known yourself? Here is the confrontation. Socrates declared, "The unexamined life is not worth living." This phrase, so harsh and direct, is not poetry. It is a calling. It is the moment when there are no more escapes, no more excuses. Either you face your soul, or you will remain a hostage to shadows, roles, and invisible chains. Think about social media. How many hours have you spent trying to prove your worth? How many times have you compared your backstage with someone else's perfect stage? This silent race is a trap, and the more you run, the farther you drift from yourself. It is like chasing your own shadow, useless, draining, endless. Seneca reinforced this. It is not that we have little time, but that we waste much of it. We waste it because we are hypnotized by the illusion that we must fix ourselves, when in truth, we simply need to remember who we already are. Wisdom is not in accumulating titles, but in cultivating the courage to look within, remove the mask, and face the silence. This is the triad at its peak. Ignorance is fleeing from inner truth. The consequence is a life wasted on false roles. The solution is the philosophical dive into self-knowledge, where we discover that virtue is not in being perfect, but in being authentic. And here I leave you with the question that can transform your existence. Who are you when there is no one to applaud? And you, have you had the courage to face yourself without masks? Share your thoughts in the comments. Imagine a murky lake. If you plunge your hands in, the mud rises, the water stirs, and nothing can be seen. But if you wait in silence, the dust settles at the bottom and clarity emerges. Our mind works the same way. The more we struggle to fix ourselves, the more we cloud the vision of who we really are. Silence, however, is not absence, but presence. It is in silence that truth reveals itself. In daily life, we forget the value of silence. We live surrounded by notifications, endless playlists, virtual meetings. The noise prevents us from hearing the essential, ourselves. Neuroscience research shows that moments of pause increase mental clarity and reduce stress. But who, in the rush of routine, allows themselves to simply be? Socrates did not seek ready-made answers. He sought questions. He knew that silent questioning creates the space for self-knowledge. It is in this emptiness that the greatest wisdom is found, realizing that nothing needs to be added in order to be whole. As Epictetus also said, it is not things themselves that disturb us, but the opinions we have about them. Here, once again, the triad reveals itself. Ignorance is believing we must fill every space with noise and distraction. The consequence is never coming into contact with one's own soul. The solution is to cultivate reflective silence, where the virtue of patience restores clarity and serenity. And this silence is not escape, it is reunion. It is in emptiness that we discover we are already enough, and that the restless pursuit was only dust on the surface. And you, have you ever experienced the transformative power of deep silence? Share your thoughts in the comments. Think of a dance. The steps are not fixed, the rhythm changes, the music speeds up and slows down. Still, the dancer surrenders, flows, improvises. Life is exactly like this, an invitation to dance. But instead of moving with lightness, we try to control every beat, rehearse every gesture, as if it were a rigid choreography. The result? Frustration and exhaustion. In daily life, this is reflected in the attempt to control everything. Perfect career plans, idealized relationships, unattainable goals. But reality insists on showing us that the unexpected happens, a layoff, an illness, a breakup. When we do not accept this fluidity, we suffer. Studies on resilience show that people who are able to adapt to change tend to live more satisfied lives and with greater psychological well-being. Socrates would remind us that true wisdom is in recognizing one's own ignorance. And what is ignorance, if not believing that life can be controlled like a machine? The dance of life does not ask for rigid effort, but for surrender, trust, and reflection. The triad here is clear. Ignorance is wanting to dominate the unpredictable. The consequence is living anxiously, trapped in unrealistic expectations. The philosophical solution is the spirit of Wu Wei from Taoism, acting in harmony with the flow, not against it. It does not mean passivity, but the intelligence of allowing life to guide us, as music guides the body. This surrender reveals something greater. True virtue is not rigidity, but flexibility. The soul that dances does not break, because it understands that life is improvisation, not a rehearsed performance. And you, have you been living trying to control every step, or have you already allowed yourself to simply dance? Share your thoughts in the comments. Imagine carrying an invisible backpack every day. Inside it are old guilts, unresolved regrets, the expectations of others. You keep walking, but each step becomes heavier. Many live like this, carrying burdens that no longer belong to the present. This is the human condition when we confuse the past with identity. In practice, we see this in people who define themselves by past mistakes. I failed, therefore I am a failure, or by inherited labels. They always said I'm shy, therefore I can't change. This emotional weight traps us. Psychology calls this process rumination, mentally replaying failures, which increases the risk of depression. Socrates would remind us that we are not what others have said, but what we discover when we look within. Know thyself. Idun. This is the call to self-knowledge, to the act of realizing that truth does not lie in the label, but in the living, pulsating soul. Here, the triad appears. Ignorance is believing that we are our burdens. The consequence is living crushed under the weight of the past. The solution is philosophical liberation through reflection, to understand that the burden is only a narrative. When we drop the backpack, we discover the lightness of simply being. Nietzsche said that one must transform weight into dance. The burden does not need to be denied, but reinterpreted. Pain is raw material for virtue, not for imprisonment. Instead of hiding our scars, we can embrace them as marks of growth. And you, what do you still carry in your invisible backpack? Have you thought about setting it down, even for just a moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. Imagine the sky. It does not compete with the clouds. It does not try to hold back the sun, nor does it prevent the rain. It simply remains. Vast, silent, allowing everything to happen within it. So too is the essence of our soul. Simple, open, whole, but distracted, we create complications. We seek miracle formulas, social comparisons, techniques to become more productive, when deep down, life only asks for presence. In daily life, this distancing from simplicity reveals itself in haste. We wake up rushing, eat lunch in a hurry, reply to messages on autopilot. At the end of the day, we barely remember what we felt. It is not a lack of time, it is a lack of awareness. Studies in mindfulness show that simple practices, such as observing the breath for 2 minutes, reduce anxiety and increase mental clarity. But how many allow themselves this pause? Socrates and the ancient philosophers knew wisdom lies in the essential. Aristotle said that happiness is not in possession, but in the practice of virtue. And virtue manifests itself in small acts, listening attentively, walking without hurry, giving thanks for the present moment. The triad here is revealing. Ignorance is believing that life is a race for external achievements. The consequence is living empty, even when surrounded by excess. The philosophical solution is the return to simplicity, cultivating self-knowledge in what is basic: bread, water, breath, human connection. This simplicity is not poverty, but wealth. It is in it that we recognize the truth. We are enough, like the sky that does not need to prove anything to exist. And have you experienced the peace of simply being without chasing anything? Share your thoughts in the comments. Think of a circle. No matter where you begin, at some point you will return to the start. Life is the same. No matter how much we chase goals, dreams, and expectations, in the end, we always return to the same point: ourselves. It is in this return that we realize nothing was ever truly lost, only forgotten. In daily life, the feeling of emptiness may seem like failure, but in truth, it is an invitation. How many try to fill this emptiness with shopping, shows, superficial relationships? The problem is that emptiness is not filled with distractions, but with presence. Existential psychology studies show that the meaning of life is not found in external goals, but in the way we relate to the present. Socrates, with his affectionate irony, would remind us, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." And in that humility lies wisdom, to stop chasing an ideal self and rediscover the real self. The return is not a setback, but a reunion. The triad closes. Ignorance is believing that we must become something in order to deserve to live. The consequence is wasting life on illusory races. The solution is philosophical reflection that brings us back to the simple fact of existing. Virtue is not perfection, but authenticity. Deep down, the soul has always known this. Here is the final reminder. You are already enough. Life does not demand that you fix yourself, only that you live, just as the sky allows the clouds, just as the sea embraces the waves. And have you allowed yourself to feel that you need not change anything in order to be whole? We have reached the end of this reflection, but the true journey begins now within you. If there is one thing Socrates taught us, it is that life only has value when examined. And what we have examined here is precisely the illusion that we must fix ourselves in order to be worthy. The truth is different. We are already enough, already whole, already a living expression of the universe. Philosophy is not distant theory. It is daily practice. Each gesture of presence, each moment of silence, each choice of authenticity is an act of virtue. The great liberation is not in winning external battles, but in recognizing that the greatest victory is over the ignorance that keeps us bound by invisible chains. Let this message become more than words. Transform it into action, into daily reflection, into new ways of seeing your own soul. It is not about denying pain or challenges, but about understanding them as part of the flow, like the river that never stops running. Now I invite you, in the comments, share what touched you most in this dialogue. Your response may inspire other souls in search of wisdom. And if this journey made sense to you, subscribe and share this video. In this way, we will continue together in this exercise of self-knowledge. Because in the end, the greatest discovery is simple and powerful. You do not need to become, you already are. And the next step may reveal something even deeper, perhaps that which you have always sought, without knowing it was already within you.